Good morning. Happy Friday. I was asked to talk about assault and specifically whether or not any touching is an assault. And I figure I'd give you a fairly broad overview, hopefully in about 5 minutes or less. There, every state, well, not every state, states a lot of times will change the definitions of assault and battery, and sometimes states will put battery into assault, and it's all sorts of different, weird, and crazy. And since the person who asked the question recognized that these laws vary from state to state, I'm going to give you a much broader definition. This is what you would learn in law school, for example, or if you're studying to take the bar exam, this is what you would learn. And there are two things. There's assault, which is assault has different definitions for criminal and tort. So I guess we should start there. First of all, there's criminal assault and battery, and there's the tort, which is the civil assault and battery. Battery is generally defined the same for either criminal or civil. It is the harmful or offensive touching of another person. Now, in criminal, they have different levels of battery, where like you dismember someone, like if you cut off their hand, that's a different level of battery than if you just slap someone in the ass, right? In civil, they handle it differently. You have to prove that someone did a harmful or offensive touching. That's the liability portion. And then damages is where you escalate it, is where it goes from just nominal damages, like, they did actually, touch you in an offensive way, but they didn't actually do any damage and it wasn't really offensive. So here's your $1 nominal damages, all the way up to, they ended up cutting off your hand, and then that's going to be, a lot more damages. And you could get a general idea of the kind of damages you're looking at by how willing lawyers are to take the case on a contingency basis, or at least that's my experience. So that's battery. It's any harmful or offensive touching. If there is no touching, then you don't have a battery. And then you'd have to prove that the touching was either harmful or offensive, and they're not going to use a subjective offensive, because I don't like Bob. I don't want Bob to touch me. So if Bob touches me even on the shoulder, like, hey, how you doing, John? And he slaps me on the shoulder, like a friendly slap, like a pat on the shoulder, I can't say, oh, that's battery, and get him arrested. It has to be objectively offensive. So if I walk up to Betty and I grab her boob and she doesn't know me or like me, random guys aren't supposed to go up and grab a girl's boobs. That's going to be battery, because that is offensive. It's going to be battery for civil. It's going to be battery for criminal. And again, there's different levels of it. There's sexual battery, blah, blah, blah. But we're talking generally speaking here. Now, assault is different for torts versus criminal. Criminal is pretty easy. Criminal, you have to have the intent to commit a battery. That's what the state has to prove. Whether or not you actually were successful in committing the battery is not really relevant. It is whether or not you intended to commit a battery. And that's why you oftentimes hear assault and battery lumped together, because if you successfully complete a battery in criminal law, you have successfully assaulted someone. You intended to commit the battery and you actually committed the battery. Congratulations. You could get charged with and convicted of 2 potential crimes. Generally speaking, your state laws may vary. I'm just going broad overview. In torts, it's a little bit different. In torts, you would have to show that the other person did something that placed you in an imminent apprehension of physical contact that is harmful or offensive. So basically, they have to place you within an imminent apprehension, a reasonable apprehension, mind you, of imminent physical harm or offensive touching. So it's in civil law, if I threw a rock past your head just to scare you, just to make you jump, with no intention of actually hitting you, no intention of actually committing a battery, just intending to scare you, that works for civil. Whereas if I throw a rock past your head and you wanted to have me charged with the crime of assault, well, the state's going to have to prove that I intended to actually hit you with the ball. And that might be harder for them to do. So they may not be able to prove the crime of assault, whereas it's a lot easier to prove the tort of assault. So now that we have that kind of general background out of the way, let's discuss, generally speaking, a situation like where Furry Potato was outside of someone's home, someone who she didn't like for whatever reason. And I'm using she actually was exercising her First Amendment right until someone approached her. And then she got, she called them names and stuff, which again, she has every right to do. I mean, she's a disgusting person. I don't like her personally, but she has every right to voice her opinion and to protest, as long as she's not in violation of any laws. If she's on the sidewalk and there are no laws prohibiting it, she can protest there. So a guy approached her and had a verbal confrontation with her, and then he turned to leave, and she followed him. And now, this might sound a little not PC, and I do apologize about that, but Furry Potato is biologically a man, and human beings are a sexually dimorphic species. And what furry identifies is up to furry, and furry's a she. As far as I'm concerned, I will call furry a she. But furry is, biologically speaking, as in from the genes to the gonads to her bone structure, her muscle, her muscular structure, even skin. There's a difference between biological male skin and biological female skin in how it's actually made. At least if you would believe the deodorant commercials and things like that. So there is a 6 foot something tall biological male who is aggressively coming up behind the guy who is walking away. The guy who's walking away turns around and places his hand out, stopping Furry from getting closer. And Furry says that's assault. And now we have to ask ourselves, is it assault? Well, let's start off with assault. As far as the civil assault is concerned, well, did he place her in imminent apprehension of a battery? A reasonable apprehension of imminent battery? And the answer to that is, well, maybe. Is where he touched Furry in a location where it is reasonable, where the average person would think it is reasonable to be touched. And from my understanding, Furry has had breast enhancements. So, I mean, that is a question for a jury. And I don't really know whether or not the guy touched her in a place where it would be offensive to be touched if you identify as a woman. However, that is a civil matter, and that is something that would go in front of a civil jury. Another question is whether or not the man had a valid justification for it. So, was Furry assaulting him? Was the man who was walking away from Furry as this 6 foot tall, 180 pound biological male who is very aggressive, comes up behind him and acts in an intimidating and aggressive manner? Well, was that guy, the guy who was walking away, did he have a reasonable apprehension of imminent battery? I would say probably. You don't have to wait, just like in Winehouse, you don't have to wait till the gun clears a holster. You don't have to wait until you're battered to respond. Humans are social creatures, and we can communicate to juries that we felt like we were being threatened. There's this hostile 6-foot-tall biological male who's coming up behind me being very aggressive, calling me names and just being very dominant and aggressive. That guy's gonna leave that cart there. What a jerk. What a jerk. Too far to walk it back. Anyway, so the guy has what's called an affirmative defense, and that's probably going to work for him in a civil court. Now let's talk about the battery. Well, we had to kind of discuss that, because was she placed in reasonable apprehension of imminent battery? Yes, she probably was. Was she then, maybe she was. Was she then battered? It depends on where he touched her. It depends on whether or not she could show that that it was offensive, because it didn't harm her. So she's gonna have to prove that it was offensive, and he has his affirmative defense. It's up to a jury at this point. I'm not going to say whether or not she would win, but she probably wouldn't get a lot for damages, because her behavior going in there was at least somewhat culpable. She at least gave him a valid claim for a affirmative defense, whether or not they're going to buy it in whole. Now, as far as the crime is concerned, again, the same kinds of things. Did he assault her? Well, did he intend to batter her? Well, he intended to touch her. So again, we're going to go to, would a reasonable person find that touching was offensive? Because it obviously wasn't harmful. Same kind of bailiwick, except instead of having to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence like you would in civil, you'd have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a lot harder to do. And the same affirmative defense would apply. So it would be a simple battery. It'd be a simple assault. It'd be a simple battery. Both are relatively minor misdemeanors, at least in California. This did happen in California. I'm using California law, not only because I'm more comfortable with it, but because, well, it happened in California. And his defense would be an affirmative defense. Did she assault him criminally? No, she did not. Because again, she did not intend to batter him. She was just menacing. There might be charges that she could face over that. I haven't looked it up. I don't really care about it. I'm not doing a video based on what she did or what she was charged with. I'm talking about assault. But my gut instinct would be that she was charged with some sort of a stalking offense, stalking and harassment from following him, etc. Anyway, so that's my best example. I did take a little bit longer explaining it than I intended to. Thanks for watching, and have a safe and fun weekend.